Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today's video is part 2 of my Q&A session. I couldn't fit them all into one video. There were so many questions, but you know, that's lovely. I love being asked questions. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews and also fun perfume tags. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing and please also like this video if you do like this kind of content. So if you've not seen part 1, I'm going to leave it linked down below, but let's get into part 2. So Rose Ayala Perfume Addict 5059 asks, when does this stop being fun for you? And she's also got a channel, so I totally understand why she's asking that question. I think Rose's question is really interesting because I think if you're doing anything outside of YouTube, like I have a full-time job, or if you're someone who's parenting, I can imagine YouTube is really difficult well, I know it's really difficult in a full-time job situation, but I can imagine it's also really difficult if you're parenting as well. I think it just takes up a lot of time and you have to really want to do this. Otherwise, you're not going to do it because it just is so much work. Even for just one video a week, it could be really lots of work. And I think for me, it stops being enjoyable when it feels like work, because this is meant to be my hobby. I don't get paid other than through ad revenue for doing this. It's just something I do because I enjoy it. So I guess it's not fun for me when it feels like a chore, and it feels most like a chore when I feel uninspired. And that does happen sometimes, but that's why I tend to film 2 videos at once, so I can then just have a bit of a break and a breather and just regroup and rethink. So yeah, I think in conclusion, it stops being fun for me when it's something that I don't feel inspired to do. So Jenka68 asks, what do you think about perfume dupes? So I've actually made a whole video all about clone fragrances and all about perfume dupes. So I'm just going to leave that linked, and really that's a whole half-hour discussion on the topic. So I think I've covered it there. C. Blake, Candy, she has left me a huge question, so I'm going to have to read it because I can't remember all of it. So it's a really interesting question. So it says, let's have some fun, shall we? Please create a geeky research fantasy. Let's say you had a substantial research budget to study any aspect of fragrance you like. No corporate or government entities would need to be satisfied with your study focus. You can collect fragrance data from any biopsychosocial angle you'd like. You have enough money for staff whom you would direct. What would you be interested to learn, and what would be your study design? So, as we know, olfactory receptor genes are amongst some of the most diverse in the genome, but I'd really like to look into particular variants that may give us very positive or very negative reactions to particular fragrance types. This kind of study would be incredibly expensive and time-consuming and labour-intensive to run, so this is never ever going to be funded. And that's because olfactory receptor genes are incredibly similar to each other, so you would have to use very complicated types of sequencing to be able to find that kind of data. And you would also need humongous amounts of people sequenced to be able to find anything meaningful, because you're basically doing an association study. So I think that would need long read sequencing, which costs a fortune. And you would need banks and banks and banks of advanced research computing to handle all the data that you would get from those studies, as well as loads and loads of individuals to run those computers with commands. As part of that study, I would also need to develop some way of measuring people's responses to fragrances in a very fair way. And I'm not sure I've got skills to know what way I would do that in, but I'd need to talk to psychologists and other people to be able to work those out. So another aspect I'd be really interested in would be to know whether particular people with really strong sensitivities in other sensory organs, so for example, people can be super tasters, there might be others who have amazing sight or amazing hearing, and I just want to know if those people have enhanced senses in one particular area, does that translate into a love of fragrance as well? Because I really feel like there's a big overlap between people with synesthesia and people who really enjoy fragrance. So I'm just interested to know maybe just more about that and learn more about that. ACC426 asks, what perfumes do you consider to be masterpieces and why? Do you think there will be any groundbreaking perfumes again when it currently seems like we are dealing with an oversaturated market with endless designer and niche perfumes and flankers constantly popping up? So I personally think the word masterpiece is massively overused, especially on YouTube. I have watched those kind of masterpiece fragrances videos, and generally I disagree with people's choices because it's an entirely subjective kind of nomenclature, isn't it? I mean, what is a masterpiece? A masterpiece is something that individual considers to be a masterpiece. And really you need an overall view, don't you? And who should you be consulting? The general public? Should you be consulting people who work in the industry, people who know something about fragrance, or just some randomers on YouTube? You know, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. For me, I think a masterpiece has to be something you can't fault. And it has to be something, for me, that's groundbreaking, something that's really created a whole new genre of fragrance. It doesn't necessarily even have to be something that I personally like. So I would say things like Baccarat Rouge 540 are potentially a masterpiece because they created a whole new genre of fragrance. But I don't like Baccarat Rouge 540. Also, I would say fragrances like Angel would perhaps be a masterpiece because they really changed the market for fragrances. But do I want to wear Angel every day? No, I don't. It's just a very different thing, isn't it, between your favourite fragrance or whether it's a masterpiece. Does it have to be something people have even heard of to say it's a masterpiece? It's a really difficult question. So with the second point, I do think the market is oversaturated and I do think there are just too many fragrance releases. And I actually appreciate brands that don't release a lot of fragrances. It feels more special. And I think there's an awful lot of guff out there. I think there is just an oversaturation of very similar smelling things nowadays, and there's a lack of individuality out there. Do I think there will be any groundbreaking fragrances ever again? Yes, I do think there will be groundbreaking fragrances, but I don't think there'll be designer fragrances. I think that golden era of designer fragrance is over. I think brands play it too safe these days. Brands want success, and the way to guarantee success is something quite middle of the road and something that's just well advertised. And really, you know, designer brands have had it quite good, haven't they, for quite a long time. But I do think that niche is becoming more important to the market, and even higher level designer brands like Tom Ford and things are just becoming more mainstream. They're becoming more what people on the street want to wear. So I do think that the price of fragrances is just generally going to go up because people just get used to paying more money, and that just makes everything more expensive for everybody, basically. So ACC426 also asks, is there some special common psychology shared by perfume lovers other than obvious traits? This is an interesting question, actually, because I think a lot of perfume lovers, especially on YouTube, on Instagram, have had some kind of traumatic event in their past that has triggered some big emotional response and has in some way either led them to or been associated with the time at which they started really getting into fragrance. And I'm not sure whether that's a big thing in the real world out there or whether it's just people on social media, but I've really noticed that on social media. So Desert Gin asks, what are the fragrances you remember smelling as a child or teenager? Which are your favourites? How do you think they influence your taste in perfume today? So I have an entire video about the fragrances I've smelt in my past and how they've sort of influenced my taste and influenced my life. And it's called Fragrances of My Life. So I'm going to leave that video linked because I think that video really covers this question quite well. I think maybe the fragrances I've smelt in the past have become nostalgic to me, and they're things that I might not even necessarily want to wear myself, but I'm quite happy to sniff from a bottle. So for example, I have my grandmother's Eau de Cologne 4711 bottle that she gave to me when I was little, and I just take the top off and smell it, and it just takes me back into childhood. And I don't think that, you know, that fragrance has in any way influenced my taste. I'm not someone who gravitates towards citrus fragrances. I'm not someone who likes soapy fragrances. But I just think it all informs, doesn't it, your experience of smells in the world. I actually don't think the things that I smelt when I was growing up have greatly influenced my taste. I think maybe, if anything, they've put me off those kinds of fragrances because I associate them with other people. I associate those fragrances with not being me. And I guess that's why I don't choose them. But I think the ones that I tended to wear when I was growing up, very few of those fragrances would I still want to wear now. I think your taste just moves on as you grow up and you become less sensitive almost to fragrances. You become more tolerant of different styles of perfumery. So jaxbeautifulyou asked, if you had to pick a signature fragrance, which would it be? So I think it would always be something on the quieter side, something quite clean smelling, something really quite inoffensive. So I'd probably choose something like Kenzo World. I just think that fragrance has a calmness about it, and I think that really reflects me as a person. And I also think that fragrance is something that's got me through tough times, and just wearing it makes me think about that and makes me kind of feel like I'm going to be okay, I guess, is how I feel about that fragrance. So I think I'd choose Kenzo World. But I think it's a hard thing to choose, isn't it? Because I don't think it's something that most of us want to do anymore. Not most of us don't want to wear one fragrance for the rest of our lives, especially on YouTube. So Slice is Nice 850 asks, did anybody influence the way you perceive and judge fragrances? I don't think they have. I think really your own judgment comes from within, isn't it? You want to be fair, you want to be relevant to the price point the fragrance is at, because, you know, the price point informs to some degree how good you should believe the fragrance should be, because you don't want to pay £200 for something that you think you could get for £20. But also, it's just a personal opinion, isn't it? It's no one can influence what you actually feel when you smell a fragrance. So I think you can learn about, you know, how other fragrances smell. You can smell loads and loads of fragrances, and that is going to probably be more informative than watching anybody on YouTube and looking at how they judge fragrances. I think I'm pretty different in respect of some reviewers. So some reviewers will talk about the box, they'll talk about the bottle. I don't really do that because I'm not really concerned with that. I'm more concerned with the fragrance itself. But I think as well, I'm quite forensic in how I analyse fragrances. So I will sniff them multiple times, and I will take notes on only the second time. And then the third time I will kind of create some kind of overall impression from my first 3 wears of it. And then if I need more time with it, I will wear it a 4th or 5th time. Because some fragrances, they're a bit shapeshiftery. You don't really know how to judge them on 1 or 2 or 3 goes, and you have to wear them 4, 5 or 6 times. And then others are quite linear and quite dull, and you kind of suss them out after 3 goes. You don't really need any more wears. But I think it's always good to get a consensus. So the next question is from Louise Light, 3866, and they ask, the most feminine scents out there, please. So I'm someone who tries not to gender my fragrances. So I try not to ever say, I think this leans feminine, I think this leans masculine in my reviews, because I believe it's personal preference. So I don't know Louise's personal preference or what she deems to be feminine or masculine, because that kind of thing changes depending upon your personal experience, the society you were brought up in, etc., what you smelled as a child, what your beliefs are. So I'm just going to go with some fruity florals and hope that I'm along the right lines. So I'm going to go with some light sweet ones. Hopefully that suits. So I'm going to choose Jasmine des Anges by Christian Dior. So that's a light, sweet, fruity floral fragrance. Jasmine, slightly honeyed jasmine with some apricot as well, and a nice musky dry down. I think my other choice would be Insolence by Guerlain. I think that fragrance is just instant smile on my face, and it just makes me think of springtime, and it's just got this, again, fruity floral sweetness to it that I just think is very uplifting. So the next question is from BMe7403, and they say, what qualities do you seek in perfume to consider it is the best and worth purchasing? So I guess this means from my own point of view and my own purchasing rather than suggesting it to other people to purchase. So I would look for something that I don't have, something that I enjoy, something that smells above its price point, something that lasts probably more than 3 hours, something that projects the level that I want it to project, and something that I feel just makes my heart sing, that talks to me, that has a story to it, something that really takes me somewhere, takes me on a journey, takes me to somewhere I've been, takes me to a past memory, is nostalgic. It has to have something that triggers some emotional response in me, really. And that's not something that you can grab hold of. That's something that's very much concept, isn't it? That's something that's very personal to you. So that's what makes me purchase a fragrance, but I don't think that's something that can necessarily come across when you're reviewing a fragrance. So the next question is from victorashul, and they ask, can you expand on the idea of how fragrance consumers can punish those fragrance houses by buying clones if they don't deliver good quality? I think it's really unlikely that as a group of consumers we are going to form any kind of action that is going to be coordinated or strike-like against a fragrance house. I think we are a very small amount of the perfume consuming community here on YouTube. The rest of the world out there aren't watching these videos and they aren't quite so concerned. They will perhaps even smell Miss Dior, for example, and not even realise that it's ever been reformulated because it's the same name. Why would it have been reformulated? You know, that it's just not something that the general public think about. So I think this is not something that's ever going to happen in a significant number because Fragcom is such a small percentage of the perfume buying community. But, you know, interesting idea and interesting question. So the next question is from ReggieTuxCat. Brilliant name. So it says, it's amazing our preferences change as we age. I used to love sweet scents and now I'm shying away from them. Are there any notes or accords you didn't care for in your youth that you like now and vice versa? So I think when I was younger, I really shied away from perfume notes like ylang ylang, also aldehydes and oak moss. I just didn't understand them. I'd only smelt them in a very small selection of fragrances that were things that older people in my family wore, and that's why I didn't understand them. I just hadn't smelt them in a more modern context or in a diverse context. And now those three notes I really do appreciate and I enjoy in fragrances, but I think initially I just found them completely off-putting. I think I might turn this question around a little bit and just go with notes that kind of blew my mind when I first smelt them. So those ones would be things like sandalwood. I just had no idea what sandalwood would smell like. I was expecting something woody, and okay, yes, it can smell like a slightly spiced blonde wood, but it can also smell quite milky and it can also smell a little bit green even. I just think it's a really interesting note and it's something that I didn't realise just how it smelled basically. I think I had the same reactions when I first smelled cashmeran and when I first smelled ambroxan. When I first noticed them, when I first noticed how enveloping cashmeran can smell, how it can smell peppery sometimes, and with ambroxan, how I could smell when it's sort of in the background versus when it's really prominent in a fragrance. I found that just really fascinating. So Maria Kormandraki actually asked loads and loads of questions, and I'm just going to answer her first question. So she asked, which are the strongest fragrances that you've tried on, the ones that lasted 8 hours plus? So I'm going to choose Decadence by Marc Jacobs, Stash by SJP, This Is Her by Zadig and Voltaire, Angel by Mugler, I have the original formulation that lasts forever, Intense Cafe by Montal, Opus 3 by Amouage, Imperial Emerald by Merchant of Venice, all of those last for days. Invite Only by Kayali, that's a really long lasting fragrance, and L'Ombre de Merveille by Hermès. Just Julia 8007 asks, is there anything that you would have done differently when you were starting out as a fragrance channel? What advice would you give to other fragrance channels? I think my biggest piece of advice is have a USP, have something that makes people want to watch your channel, have something that's uniquely you, because you can spend an awful lot of money buying fragrances and honestly, so many other people here will be doing far more spending than you are. What you need is something that grabs people, something that makes people watch you above the fact that you're spending money, because that's not sustainable. And lots of people burn out before they hit monetization because they spend so much money that they just basically bankrupt themselves before they get there. And I'm not joking. People literally were spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds in 2020, 2021 when I first started. And I just realised very quickly that I could never ever keep up with that kind of level of spending. And you're also competing against larger channels who will be getting significant amounts of PR, especially when you first start. I think as well, I would say people starting out, just learn about YouTube, learn how it works. Watch a video about how YouTube works. And that's just something I never ever thought about doing when I first started YouTube. Even when I'd had my channel for several years, I still wasn't actually doing that. And that's something that can really help you to get a foot in the door with YouTube if you understand how it works. I would also suggest downloading YouTube Studio. That's something I didn't do until about, I don't know, a year ago. That's ridiculous, isn't it? That just makes your life so much easier, answering comments and stuff, because it's all there in tabs. But no, I was just using the YouTube app and just answering comments there. No one else runs a fragrance channel like I do. I'm just a complete mess. So question number 2 is, when you first started, how long did it take you to plan, edit and upload videos? I think I'm going to probably surprise people, because I think everybody will be expecting it to be much quicker nowadays, and actually I take far longer than I did originally. Originally I didn't really have any editing software, and I just filmed videos on my laptop, and that had a 15-minute limit, and the only way I could edit it, in inverted commas, was when I was actually filming it, so I could only like rewind the video and then basically paste over the top of a new film. So I would just film it all in one go, upload that, and then just release it. I had absolutely no clue about YouTube or anything, and I really didn't plan my videos when I was first starting out, and that's really why it took me so long to get to 1,000, because if you don't plan, your videos are a complete car crash. It takes so much talent to be able to do this off the tip of your tongue and just talk to a camera. So yeah, a lot longer. So Stephanie Renee F40 asks, your top 10 Middle Eastern fragrances. I'm assuming Stephanie might mean affordable Middle Eastern fragrances, because I could definitely do a top 10 of Amouage, but I don't think that's what she means, so I'm not going to. But I just don't think I'd even got 10 on my radar that I actually have enjoyed, so I don't really want to lead you astray by saying 10 that I'm not particularly bothered by. So I just don't think I'm really that qualified to say which ones would be in my top 10 because of that. The only one that I've liked, as I've said earlier in the video, is Armaf Club de Nuit Intense Woman. But that was an old bottle from several years back, so they may have changed the formulation now, because it did get popular after that person, I think, who sent me that decan bought it. So the next question is from Whiskey Midnight, and I'm going to have to read this because it's a very long question. So they say, I love fragrances, but I'm a little concerned with commercial perfume ingredients having negative health impacts, such as acting as endocrine disruptors. I know one recently banned ingredient for jasmine caused fertility issues. Can you talk about fragrances and health and safety a little bit? This is a topic I shy away from, because I don't have time to do enough research into this to be able to fully get a grasp on something that I can tell you without causing alarm or saying things that might not be true. So my belief in this is that I think we are exposed to crazy amounts of chemicals in our everyday lives, including through personal care products. So, for example, deodorant and body lotions and facial skincare, sun protection. Those are all things that could contribute to endocrine disruption. And I think as well, we are exposed to them through just drinking water, eating foods. It's not just fragrance that's a big part of this. And also, depending upon the exposure route, so, ingestion or the position on your body, even where things are applied. So, for example, your armpits are very much more able to absorb certain chemicals than other places on your body for certain types of chemical. It also depends on the size of the molecule involved. So some will cross the skin barrier, some others won't. Some, when you eat them, will break down and be excreted. Others will accumulate in your body. So I think, there's just so many different aspects here, and I just don't have the time to do the reading to be able to fully say with any clarity, with scientific accuracy, what the truth is, I guess. And I don't want to spread alarm. And I do think that IFRA are doing their best, and I do think that the EU and the US are also doing their best to protect consumers from any risks. But I just think perfume is such a small blip in this world of exposure. We are exposed to so many different things. And so for me, it's not a concern, but I understand that it's part of something that needs to be looked at more. But clearly there is endocrine disruption going on in general in the world, and I can see why people would be concerned about it. So the next question is from Mohammed Al-Jatani, and I'm just going to read this out again because it's a long question. So the question is, can you please share your opinion about the main reasons of reformulation, why always reformulated perfume tends to be worse? In my opinion of you, perfume quality cannot be known by smelling. Also, expensive perfumes are not necessarily built with expensive ingredients. What is your point of view? Okay, so the main reasons for reformulation, I made a video a few weeks ago, so I think I've covered that. So I guess there's a few things going on here, isn't there? Psychologically, you are always going to be annoyed by something changing, like a fragrance that you love. And that's maybe why you might think the reformulation is worse than the original fragrance. But of course, that's the widely held opinion, so maybe there is some truth to it. So I think maybe it's because fragrance houses get forced to reformulate sometimes because of rule changes by IFRA. But also fragrance companies take it as an opportunity to cheapen fragrances often. If they can save any money, they will do. So I think that might be another reason why it might not smell as good. But really, there's nothing to say that using something cheaper would make it smell worse. It doesn't necessarily follow, does it, that something more expensive smells better? It's, again, a matter of opinion. So the next point that Mohammed made was that perfume quality can't be known by smelling, in his opinion. I get that. I get that, you know, it's completely subjective, isn't it? What does perfume quality mean? You know, if no one's defining it, then yes, how can anyone know what it is? I think sometimes you can associate particular smells with quality, and that's because certain perfume brands use the same chemicals over and over again in their fragrances, and it sort of almost becomes a house signature. And depending upon your view of that house, you can either think that's poor quality or you can think it's great quality. And I guess that's, again, a personal opinion, isn't it? I think for me, there are fragrances in my collection that I can smell just aren't the best fragrances, but they're still fragrances that I like. They're still fragrances that I wear, and they're still fragrances that I think are actually punching above their price point. I think really when you smell something, you need to bear in mind what it's being sold at. You know, if it's being sold at £10, you're going to judge that fragrance very differently to if the fragrance is being sold at £200, because you're going to have lower expectations of that fragrance. Or at least you would hope the £200 fragrance would smell far better than a £10 fragrance, although that's not necessarily true. It's a difficult thing to judge, isn't it, quality? It's just so subjective, which is really fragrance all over. So next, Topzyturvey asked, is there any particular fragrance advertising that you've really enjoyed? Yes. So Kenzo World had a really wacky advert, and I thought it was really inventive and weird, and it just really made me want to try the fragrance because it was so off the wall weird. And I think that fragrance advert actually won awards, and it is one of those fragrance adverts that your jaw just drops. You can find videos of it on YouTube. If I find one, I'll leave it linked in the description box. But it's just a crazy, crazy advert. I then also have a question from AK CJ6YU, very snappy name there. And this person has written their question in French, but basically they're asking about perfume tastes and why they vary across the world. I have tried several times to make a video on this because this is a subject that really interests me, but a lot of the time I really find myself stereotyping and it's not something I'm comfortable with, so I tend to just kind of shy away from making that video. But if I can find some actual science-based research, then I will make it eventually. So finally, EMS Heart Notes asked a few questions, and I've covered Emily's first question already, so I'm just going to leave that one out. But the second question is, are there any fragrance brands that you wouldn't choose to buy from, and why? I don't think there's anything that I would completely rule out, but I think making that video about child labour, harvesting jasmine in Egypt, and those two brands, Estee Lauder and also L'Oreal, being implicated in that practice, really made me think about the supply chains behind fragrance and made me think that I want to look further into that. I think probably quite a lot of the things that we consume are quite murky, and I think if we could actually see where stuff comes from and the conditions that people work in, especially with things like clothes, makeup, things like that, I think we'd all be pretty shocked. And I just think that it's probably a drop in the ocean, but it has made me feel very happy that I haven't purchased anything brand new from those brands for several years. I've only purchased secondhand. So I do feel like, you know, I've not given them any of my money, which is great. So Emily's last question is, what's your favourite smell in the lab? And that for sure is isopropanol. So isopropanol smells like when you have your skin cleaned for an injection, that kind of alcohol rub smell. So that's the final question in this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know what your answers would be to some of these questions. Do you disagree with me on anything? I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on any brands that you might avoid in future? Do you think that boycotting fragrance brands by buying clone fragrances is going to change the perfume industry? Do you think the current market is oversaturated? Do you worry about endocrine disruption in fragrances? I'd be really interested to know your answers and opinions. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.